Something had changed. I could feel it. Not much in my life happened by chance. Years of teaching economics at university taught me to analyze patterns. People are predictable, especially when it comes to money. And now I saw a pattern that made me feel cold inside. My daughter Audrey and her husband Reed had suddenly become a model of care and attention. They used to visit me no more than twice a month, usually on holidays or when they needed something. Now I saw them every weekend. They brought groceries, asked if I had taken my medication, if anything needed to be fixed in the house. Mom, you have to watch your blood pressure, Audrey said, putting the tonometer in front of me. At your age, it's very important. My age, 74 years old, not much by today's standards. I lived alone in a two-story house in Bellevue, drove a car, and went for a half-hour jog every morning. My late husband Alfred had left me a good insurance policy, and my own investments made a substantial profit. I could afford to live the life I wanted. Audrey was born late when I was already 32. Alfred and I had put off having a child for too long, focusing on our careers. Maybe that's why she grew up the way she did, always demanding attention, resentful that her parents were too busy. I was never a model mother. I couldn't coddle, I rarely hugged her. But I gave her everything she needed: a good education, a house full of books, the opportunity to choose her own path. On Wednesday afternoon, they came again, unannounced. We were driving by and thought we'd stop by. Audrey smiled when I opened the door. Her reddish hair was pulled back into a neat bun, her makeup perfect on her face. She always looked like she was going to a photo shoot. Not a wrinkle in her blouse, not a single unnecessary gesture. Reed stood next to her, a tall man with premature gray in his hair and a charming smile. He worked as an insurance analyst for a large company, but despite a steady income, he and Audrey were constantly living beyond their means. A new house in an upscale neighborhood, cars that changed every 2 years, vacations only at five-star hotels. What a surprise, I said, stepping back to let them into the house. Are you all alone, Mom? Audrey asked, looking around as if she expected to see someone else. Who did you expect to see here? I asked, walking into the kitchen. Would you like tea or coffee? I was just wondering if you'd invited any of your neighbors or friends. Audrey shrugged, settling herself at the table. Tea would be great, Reed interjected, sitting down next to his wife. How are you feeling, Violet? Audrey and I are so worried about your health. I felt fine, and Reed knew it. Until a month ago, he and Audrey had complained that I was too active for my age and could be living a more appropriate lifestyle. What exactly that meant, I didn't know, but it wasn't morning jogs or yoga. As the kettle boiled, I watched them. They exchanged glances, as if they were engaged in a silent dialogue. Reed tapped his fingers nervously on the table, and Audrey fiddled with the chain around her neck, the gold bird pendant I'd given her for her 20th birthday. How's that mall project coming along? I asked Audrey, setting the cups on the table. She worked as an architect, but she spoke of her work rarely and reluctantly, as if it were an unfortunate necessity rather than a calling. Oh, we turned it in last week, she said. No big deal. Mom, Reed, and I were thinking, maybe you should hire a home health aide, someone who could come over a couple times a week, help with the cleaning, the cooking. I took a sip of tea, hiding a smile. This is it, the first step. They want to put a spy in my house. I think I'm doing fine on my own for now, I said calmly. If I need help, I'll go to an agency. But it's not that easy, Audrey exclaimed. I need to find a reliable person, check references. We could help. Of course we could, I agreed. But we don't need to right now. Reed coughed. Violet, Audrey, and I were talking to our financial advisor the other day, and he mentioned something interesting about tax deductions for people your age. Perhaps we could go through your paperwork and find a way to save money. So that's it. They want to get to my financial records. It would almost be funny if it weren't so bitter. Thank you for your concern, Reed, but my accountant does my taxes just fine, I replied, watching his expression change. Oh, I didn't realize you had an accountant. He tried to hide his disappointment. Yes, Carla's been handling my business for 15 years, I lied. There was no Carla, but it was a good defense against their curiosity. After tea, they walked around the house as if they were looking at it for the first time. Audrey lingered in my study, where I kept my papers. Don't you think there are too many papers in here? She asked, nodding at the filing cabinet. Maybe we should digitize the important documents. Reed might be able to help. Maybe someday, I replied evasively, closing the office door softly. They left around 5 p.m., promising to stop by on the weekend. As soon as their car disappeared around the corner, I locked the door and went back into the study. Something wasn't right. I ran my hand over the folders and noticed. One of them was out of place, a folder containing bank statements from the last quarter. I checked the contents. Everything was in place, but the order of the pages had changed. Someone was going through the documents and doing it in a hurry. They saw my main account, almost $350,000, not counting investments and retirement savings. A chill went through my chest. My own daughter and her husband were going through my papers, looking for information about my money. But why? I remembered a conversation we'd had a month ago at a family dinner. We're thinking of buying a stake in a new project, Reed had said, his enthusiasm shining. It's a restaurant complex on the coast, a fantastic place, but we need some startup capital. Why not take out a loan? I asked then. Banks are so reluctant to lend money these days. Audrey sighed. You're not going to use all your savings anyway, Mom. I turned them down, and after that they didn't show up or call for almost 2 weeks. Then all of a sudden they started this campaign of caring. I pulled a notebook out of my desk drawer and wrote down the date. Then I listed all the odd behaviors of my daughter and son-in-law over the past month. It was not a pleasant list. Sudden interest in my health, suggestions for a domestic helper, interest in financial records, an attempt to gain access to my computer under the pretext of installing an antivirus program, talking about how I should rest and relax and not think about business. I put my pen away and thought about it. They were planning something, and that something involved my money. Perhaps they were counting on me trusting Audrey to handle my finances if I thought my health was deteriorating. Or were they hoping to access the accounts in some other way? The next morning, I called the bank and made an appointment with the manager. The young woman listened to my concerns with an attentive gaze. Mrs. Holder, we can put additional protection on your accounts, she suggested. Two-factor authentication, confirmation of large transactions. But if you have serious concerns, I want to open a new account, I interrupted her, and transfer most of the funds there, an account that no one will know about. The manager nodded without surprise. She had probably dealt with similar situations before. When I got home, I found 3 missed calls from Audrey. I didn't call her back, let her get nervous wondering where I'd been. Instead, I installed cameras in the house, small, discrete devices in the living room, study, and hallway. Technology had long since ceased to be a mystery to me. Having been widowed, I'd learned to figure out many things on my own. This weekend they came, as promised. This time they brought pie, my favorite, apple and cinnamon. Audrey was in the kitchen, arranging plates, and Reed was in the living room with his tablet. Mom, have you heard about the new insurance program for seniors? He asked when I sat down next to him. Very favorable terms. Really? I feigned interest. He turned the screen of his tablet toward me, showing me some graphs. The contributions are minimal, and the payout in the event of, to the heirs are very substantial. Audrey and I thought it might be a good investment. So you're suggesting that I take out a life insurance policy on you and Audrey? I didn't hide my sarcasm. Reed was embarrassed. No, it's just a prudent financial decision. At my age, people can recognize when they're being taken advantage of. I finished for him, watching him pale. Violet, you misunderstood. I got it right, I said, standing up. I'll go help Audrey with the tea. In the kitchen, my daughter was fiddling with the kettle, but she was listening to our conversation, judging by the way she flinched at my appearance. Is everything all right, Mom? She asked with feigned concern. Everything's great, I replied, taking the cups out of the cupboard. I was thinking about what you were saying about financial planning. She froze before bringing the kettle to the table. Yeah? Maybe I really should rethink how I manage my funds, I said thoughtfully. After all, I'm 74 now. Who knows how long I have left? Don't say that, Audrey exclaimed, but there was a calculating glint in her eyes. Why not? It's reality, I shrugged. I think we should discuss it next week. Maybe you could take over some of my finances. It'll be calmer that way. Audrey put the kettle on and hugged me tightly for the first time in a long time. Of course, Mom, I'm always here for you. I hugged her back, feeling her tense, like a predator ready to pounce. My own daughter. Once I'd held her in my arms, taught her to walk, read her bedtime stories. Now she was cuddling me, thinking about my money. I know, darling, I whispered, stroking her back. I know. When they left, I checked the camera footage. As I expected, while I was showering, Audrey insisted I freshen up. Reed was going through my desk drawers, taking pictures of documents on his phone. I sat in front of the screen, watching my son-in-law methodically going through my papers, and felt a cold resolve growing inside. They'd thought I was an easy target, a lonely old woman they could easily get rid of. But they miscalculated. I've decided to play their game, but by my own rules. I let them think they had the upper hand. I'll let them take what they crave, and then they would learn what it meant to outsmart Violet Holder. The plan was ready. The first part of my little play began Wednesday morning. Instead of my usual jog, I stayed in bed, and when Audrey called to report my visit, I answered in a weak, breaking voice. Mom, are you okay? There was concern in her voice, but I knew what was behind it. Just a little sick, I answered, adding a slight tremor to my voice. I think it will pass by this evening. We'll be right over, she said, and I could almost see her eyes glistening at the prospect of catching me in my weakened state. Hanging up the phone, I got out of bed and started getting ready. I removed all the important documents from my office desk, hiding them in a stash behind a bookshelf. The only thing I left in plain sight was a folder with an accidentally forgotten printout of the total amount in all my accounts, much more impressive than what they'd seen before. I added the statements of my last big earnings there too, interest from investments I'd made a few years ago. Then I applied the bare minimum of makeup, lightly emphasizing the pallor and circles under my eyes. She put on an old housecoat that she didn't usually wear because of its shabby appearance. She left her hair disheveled, not in its usual neat bun. Audrey and Reed arrived 40 minutes later. I met them at the door, leaning lightly on the door jamb, as if I were having trouble standing without support. Mom! Audrey rushed over to me, putting her arm around my shoulders. What's wrong? You look awful. I'm just weak. I let her lead me to the couch. My blood pressure must have spiked. Did you take your blood pressure? Did you take your meds? Audrey fussed around me and Reed stood back, watching with feigned concern. I didn't have time, I sighed. I couldn't even get up to get to the tonometer. I'll get it right away. Audrey rushed to the medicine cabinet. While she searched for the tonometer, Reed crouched down next to me. His eyes studied my face, and for a moment I thought he could see through my disguise. But then he stroked my hand with a caring expression. You must rest more, Violet. At your age, you can't exert yourself so much. I can't do the things I used to do so easily, I agreed, watching him nod, pleased with my confession. Audrey returned with a blood pressure monitor and started taking my blood pressure. I took a deep breath before she started, knowing it would raise the reading a little. 150/90, Audrey exclaimed, looking at the numbers. Mom, this is a hypertensive crisis. We have to call an ambulance. Don't be silly, I said weakly. Just give me my pills and I'll rest. Everything will be back to normal by tonight. But Mom, no ambulances, I said firmly, knowing that the hospital could ruin my plan. It's not the first time. It's just that I've been doing a lot of paperwork lately. All these bills, investments, my head's spinning. I noticed Reed and Audrey exchange quick glances at the mention of bills. What investments, Mom? Audrey tried to ask casually, but I caught a note of avid interest. Oh, all kinds. I waved my hand and pretended I was having trouble concentrating. Capitalization, stocks, bonds, all the documents in my office, I was just going over them yesterday. Carla thinks I should diversify my portfolio given the current market situation. You don't need to worry about that right now, Reed said, his voice softer. You need a vacation, Violet. Why not let us help you with these financial matters? Maybe you're right, I sighed, closing my eyes as if tired. I don't think as well as I used to. Yesterday, I even forgot where I put the bank statement for the last big deposit. Rest, Mom. Audrey tucked me in with a blanket. Would you like me to make you some tea? That would be wonderful, dear. While Audrey was in the kitchen, I noticed Reed glancing toward my office. When Audrey came back with the tea, I pretended to feel worse. I think I'm going to lie down in the bedroom, I said, trying to get up. I feel a little dizzy. Sure, Mom. I'll help you. Audrey gave me a shoulder to lean on, and we walked slowly toward the stairs. In the bedroom, I lay down on the bed, and Audrey carefully tucked the blanket in. You should see a doctor, Mom, she said. It's not normal. Tomorrow, if it doesn't get better, I promised. Now I'd like to get some sleep. Sure, get some rest. Audrey stroked my head. Reed and I will stay downstairs if you need anything. Just call me. As soon as the door closed, I quietly got out of bed and pulled a small tablet from the nightstand. The specially installed app showed images from the cameras I had placed around the house. I watched Audrey walk down to Reed, and they walked toward my office, talking quietly. Reed closed the door behind them, and Audrey went straight to the desk where the folder with the forgotten documents lay. Look, she whispered, going through the papers. There's a lot more here than we thought. She has almost $1 million in various accounts and securities. Reed leaned over her shoulder, his eyes sliding greedily over the numbers. Damn it, he muttered. And all this time, she'd been living so modestly, like she was barely making ends meet. She's always been frugal. Audrey flipped through the pages. Remember when she refused to give us money for the down payment on the house? Said we had to learn to live within our means. And yet she's sitting on that fortune herself. Reed shook his head. What's she going to do with it? Take him to the grave? I can see why she's so nervous, Audrey continued to study the documents. Managing that kind of capital at her age. No wonder her blood pressure's skyrocketing. Reed rubbed his chin thoughtfully. This could be our chance. She said herself she's not as sharp as she used to be. Maybe we should offer her power of attorney to manage her finances? Audrey nodded slowly, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Yes, now would be a good time. She's weak and scared. If you frame the conversation right, she'll agree. I watched them, feeling the cold fury growing inside. Rage, my own daughter, flesh and blood. She and Reed spoke of me as an obstacle to be bypassed, a means to an end. There was not a word about my health, not a drop of genuine concern. Turning off the tablet, I went back to bed. Part of me wanted to go downstairs immediately and kick them out of the house, but I restrained that impulse. The plan required patience. I had to give them what they craved, the illusion of control, the false sense of victory. After a while, there was a quiet knock at the door. I pretended I had just woken up when Audrey peeked into the room. How are you, Mom? Are you feeling better? A little, I smiled weakly. Thanks for coming over. I don't know what I would have done alone. She crouched on the edge of the bed, her face a look of concern, but her eyes remained cold, calculating. Mom, Reed and I were talking. You shouldn't be so worried about all this financial stuff. It's bad for your health. You're probably right, I sighed. But what am I supposed to do? I don't trust outsiders in these matters. What about me? Audrey took my hand. I could help. You could give me power of attorney and I could do all the paperwork. You wouldn't have to worry. I pretended to think about it, but inside I had it all figured out. I don't know, Audrey. It's a big responsibility. Mom, she said, a note of irritation in her voice that she tried to hide. I'm your daughter. Who else can you trust if not me? That's right, dear. Who else but you? Maybe you're right, I said finally. Let's do it. Just, not now. I need to come to my senses for a while. Of course, Mom. Audrey couldn't quite hide the triumph in her voice. We're in no hurry. Get well, and Reed and I will take care of the rest. The next day, I called my lawyer, Howard Price. We'd known each other for over 20 years. He'd helped me with the probate after Alfred's death, and I trusted him completely. Violet, it's good to hear from you. His deep voice sounded warm, without the falseness that soaked my daughter's voice. Howard, I need your help, I said, and complete confidentiality. As always, he assured me. I explained the situation without hiding the details. Howard listened without interrupting and only occasionally asked clarifying questions. So you want to give them a power of attorney, but a limited one? He asked when I had finished. Exactly, I confirmed. Access to only one account in which I will leave a certain amount of money. The rest should be secure. We could set up a trust. Howard suggested. Transfer the bulk of your assets there with terms of access that only you can control. And a power of attorney for your daughter will be made separately, with clear restrictions that will not be obvious to a layman. That sounds exactly right, I agreed. How quickly can we do it? Come back tomorrow and we'll get everything set up, Howard said. And Violet, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Thank you, Howard. But in a way, it's kind of liberating. All the masks are finally off. For the next few days, I continued to play the role of the frail old woman. Audrey and Reed stopped by every day, bringing groceries and medicine, helping around the house. Their concerns seemed genuine if I didn't know what was behind it. On Friday, I informed Audrey that I felt well enough to go to the notary and get my power of attorney drawn up. Are you sure, Mom? She asked, unable to hide her excitement. Shouldn't we wait a little longer? No, dear, I answered. This attack has shown me that I must take care of these things while I can. I don't want to put it off. We agreed that the next day Reed would pick me up and take me to the notary's office. That evening, I went over all the documents Howard had prepared one more time. Everything was perfect. The bulk of my funds had already been transferred to a trust that only I had access to. I'd left exactly $100,000 in the account Audrey would have access to. A large enough sum that they wouldn't suspect a trick, but only a fraction of my fortune. Saturday morning, Reed arrived right on time. He was dressed in a business suit and looked unusually serious and attentive, a real caring son-in-law. Are you feeling well today, Violet? He asked as he helped me into the car. We can reschedule if you're not feeling well. No, I'm fine, I replied. The sooner we get this over with, the better. Audrey was waiting for us at the notary's office. She was fidgeting nervously with her pen, trying to hide her impatience. When we entered, she rushed over to me, supporting me under the elbow. Careful, Mom. Take your time. Howard met us in his office. Recent events have shown that I'm not as good at it as I used to be. Audrey squeezed my hand, and Reed put his palm on my shoulder, the picture of perfect caring. Okay, Howard began to explain the paperwork. This power of attorney gives Mrs. Nimble the authority to handle the account in question at First National Bank. She will be able to make transactions from this account, including withdrawals and transfers. The power of attorney is effective immediately and is valid indefinitely until you revoke it. I signed the documents with a firm hand, noticing the slight surprise on Audrey's face. Apparently, she expected my hand to shake. That's it, Howard said, sealing the documents. Mrs. Nimble, you may now act on your mother's behalf under this power of attorney. Thank you, Mr. Price, Audrey said. Audrey was very kind. I promise that I will treat my mother's finances as responsibly as I would my own. I didn't doubt that for a moment. When we left the office, Audrey hugged me tightly. You did the right thing, Mom, she said. You don't have to worry about anything now. Reed and I will take care of everything. I know, honey, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. I'm sure you'll do exactly what you think is right. 3 days passed after I signed the power of attorney. I continued to play the role of a frail elderly woman who was struggling to manage her own affairs. Audrey and Reed's concern for me reached new heights as they called several times a day, inquiring about my well-being and offering to bring me groceries or medicine. On Wednesday night, I noticed Audrey checking her phone more often, furtively texting someone. A couple of times she went out into the garden to talk, far enough away from the house that I couldn't hear the conversation. Who were you talking to? I asked when she came back into the house slightly agitated. Huh? She made a surprised face. With a colleague, Mom. There were some questions about a project. I nodded, pretending to believe her. In fact, I knew for a fact that she didn't have any urgent project. Just 2 weeks ago, she had complained about a lull in work. On Thursday, they arrived with bags of groceries. Reed seemed particularly animated, constantly joking and telling stories from the office. I watched them, noting the imperceptible signs to the unaided eye, the way they exchanged glances, the way Audrey nodded slightly in response to her husband's silent questions. They were planning something, and I could guess what it was. Mom, we wanted to talk to you, Audrey finally said when we had finished dinner. About what, dear? I pretended to be tired and slightly confused. Reed got an urgent offer from his clients, she said quickly, as if she'd rehearsed her speech. I have to fly to Boston for a meeting, just for a few days. Yes, Reed said. It's very important for my career. The opportunity to sign a big contract. I understand, I nodded. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. Audrey gave Reed a quick glance. We realize it's unexpected, especially considering your condition. Don't worry about me. I waved her off. I'm much better. And I have a neighbor, Martha, who's always there if you need anything. Are you sure? Audrey looked a little worried, but I could see her eyes sparkle with anticipation. Absolutely, I smiled. Don't turn down this opportunity because of me. We'll call every day, Reed promised. And we'll be back very soon. Of course, darling, I patted his arm. Good luck with the negotiations. The next morning, they stopped by to say goodbye. Audrey brought me a lunch and dinner prepared in advance and arranged the medications on the nightstand next to the bed. Everything is numbered, she explained. You take your pills from the container numbered 1 in the morning, 2 at lunch, and 3 at night. You take such good care of me, I sighed with feigned gratitude. I don't even know what I did to deserve such a daughter. Audrey hugged me, and for the first time in a long time, her hug felt genuine. Did she have a conscience after all? But when she pulled away, all I saw in her eyes was impatience. She was in a hurry. Well, we should go, Reed said, glancing at his watch. The plane won't wait. Sure. I waved at them from the doorway. Have a good flight. As soon as their car was around the corner, I went back inside and turned on the computer. The bank tracking program I'd installed with Howard's help showed activity in my account exactly 2 hours later. Audrey had withdrawn $20,000, the maximum amount that could be withdrawn in one day. Technically, she was authorized to do so. I'd given her the power of attorney myself. But the money wasn't withdrawn for my needs, my bills, or medical treatment. It was withdrawn for their personal use. I felt no anger, only cold satisfaction that my predictions had been confirmed. They had turned out to be so predictable that it was almost disappointing. Opening another program on the computer, I activated the GPS tracker I had thoughtfully placed in my daughter's bag during our last dinner. The signal showed that they were headed for the international airport. I called Howard. They've made the first move, I reported. They'd withdrawn 20 grand and were on their way to the airport. You were right, Violet. I could hear the respect in his voice. Would you like me to start the process of revoking the power of attorney? Not now, I said. Let them think everything's going according to plan. I want to see how far they're willing to go. Whatever you say. But be careful. If they find out that you know about their machinations, they won't, I grinned. They're too caught up in their little victory to notice anything else. In the evening, I checked the account again. Another withdrawal, this time a $50,000 transfer to Audrey's account. They were clearly in a hurry to get as much money as they could while they had the chance. I opened a program to track the phones, using the credentials I had obtained by accidentally seeing Audrey's password during her visit. Their phones were no longer in Boston as they said they were. The geolocation showed a very different location. Male, the capital of the Maldives. Well, instead of business-oriented Boston, they'd chosen a luxurious tropical resort. Not a bad choice to spend the money they'd stolen from my mother. I smiled and opened my laptop. The screen showed a booking confirmation of villa in the same resort complex where Audrey and Reed were staying. I'd booked it 2 weeks ago, right after I'd noticed their strange behavior and increased visits. My intuition told me they were planning something big, and I wasn't wrong. The airline ticket was purchased for the same date, but 4 hours later than their flight. Just enough time for them to get to the hotel and relax, thinking they had successfully spent me. The next morning, I received a text from Audrey. Negotiations are going great. Reed is excited about the prospects. How are you, Mom? Remembering to take your meds? I replied in a tone of voice. I'm fine, dear. Glad things are working out for you. Don't worry about me. Rest up after the tough negotiations. An hour later, I checked the account again. Another withdrawal, now $30,000. They had clearly decided to empty the account completely while they were away from me. In the afternoon, I packed a small suitcase. I chose simple but elegant things for the trip. Nothing flashy that would attract attention. I put on sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and a scarf, a good disguise in case I had to watch Audrey and Reed at close range. A few special surprises for my dear relatives also went into the suitcase. Nothing dangerous or illegal. I wasn't going to stoop to their level, but something to make their vacation unforgettable. Before I left, I called Martha, my neighbor. She was the only person I could trust with the truth. "So they stole your money and ran away to the Maldives?" she exclaimed indignantly when I told her the situation. "Exactly," I confirmed. "But don't worry, I'm not going to massacre them. I just want to teach them a little lesson." "Oh, Violet," Martha shook her head. "I always knew there was something wrong with them. They've been too stodgy lately. What will happen to the house while you're gone?" "I hope so," I smiled. "Just check in once in a while to make sure everything's okay." "You bet I will." Martha hugged me tightly. "And keep me informed. I want to know all the details of your little revenge." "I will," I promised. "I think it'll be something to see." That evening, after locking up the house, I hailed a cab to the airport. In my wallet was a credit card tied to an account neither Audrey nor Reed knew existed. There was enough money in that account to give them an unforgettable surprise. On the airplane, I went over my plan one more time. Everything had been thought out to the last detail. Violet Holder, a 74-year-old widow and former economics teacher, wasn't flying to the other side of the world to enjoy retirement on a tropical beach. I was flying to teach my own daughter and her husband a lesson in greed and betrayal. They thought they had fooled an old, weak woman. They thought their plan was perfect. Steal the money and enjoy it away from home, then return with a story about a successful business trip. Maybe they even planned to repeat the trick more than once, gradually emptying my accounts. But they didn't know the main thing. I was always one step ahead. I once taught students to anticipate economic trends, analyze market behavior, and calculate risks. The same principles apply to human behavior, especially when it comes to money. People are predictable in their greed, and my daughter and son-in-law were no exception. I leaned back in my seat, watching the clouds change behind the porthole. It was going to be a long flight ahead, but that didn't bother me. I had time to prepare for the meeting. A meeting they weren't expecting at all. The plane gained altitude, and I felt a little dizzy not from the flight, but from the anticipation. Audrey and Reed thought I was home now, weak and helpless, unaware of their betrayal. How wrong they were. The moment they raised their champagne glasses to their success, I was on my way. As they enjoy the first day of their luxurious vacation, I'll be checking into a villa nearby. And when they decide that life is wonderful and everything is working out according to their plan, I'll spring into action. The flight attendant offered me drinks and I chose a glass of red wine. Why not celebrate the start of my little retaliation operation? After all, it wasn't every day that a 74-year-old woman traveled alone to the other side of the world to teach her betrayed relatives a lesson. I took a sip of wine and smiled. Audrey and Reed would soon learn what it meant to outwit Violet Holder. The Maldives greeted me with blinding sunshine and humid tropical air. After a long flight, I finally set foot in this paradise. Although my mood was far from vacation, customs control was quick. I looked like an ordinary elderly tourist. Wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses, spacious dress made of natural linen. A perfect disguise. No one would expect to see a 74-year-old woman as a vigilante. At the airport exit, I was met by a driver with a sign reading Mrs. Holder. A young Maldivian man with a friendly smile helped me with my luggage and escorted me to the boat, the only way to get to the resort island. "First time in the Maldives, ma'am?" he asked as we pulled away from the shore. "Yes," I smiled. "I thought I'd treat myself in my old age." "Oh, you picked a lovely place. One of the finest resorts in this country." I nodded, looking at the approaching island, a scattering of elegant villas among the palm trees, surrounded by the turquoise water of the lagoon. Somewhere out there, in one of those idyllic cabins, my dear relatives were spending my money, enjoying a well-deserved vacation. The boat docked at the wooden pier and I was greeted by the resort manager, a tall European man in his 40s with an impeccably polite smile. "Mrs. Holder, welcome to the Azure Lagoon. My name is Philippe Moreau. I'm the manager of this resort. I trust your trip was comfortable." "Quite, thank you," I replied, extending my hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Moreau. Please call me Philippe." He bowed slightly. "We have received your special letter. and we're ready to assist you in any way we can. The special letter was sent a week before I arrived. In it, I explained my situation, omitting some personal details, and offered a substantial reward for assisting in my little plan. The letter had had the desired effect, judging by Philip's greeting. "I'm very grateful," I said quietly. "This is a delicate matter, and I appreciate your discretion." "Absolutely," he nodded. "Let me show you to your villa. It is located close enough to the villa of your relative's villa, but off the main paths. They will not see you unless you wish them to." Philip personally escorted me to the villa, a spacious bungalow on stilts, half protruding above the water. The terrace overlooked the lagoon, and through a small gap between palm trees, I could see the roof of another villa where Audrey and Reed were staying. "It's perfect," I approved, looking around at my temporary home. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to go over a few details." We sat down in the living room of the villa. Philip accepted my envelope with the first part of the promised reward and listened carefully to my instructions. "So you want their vacation to be not entirely pleasant?" he clarified, smiling demurely. "Exactly. Nothing illegal or dangerous. Just a series of minor annoyances that will gradually accumulate." Philip made a few notes in his clipboard. "May I ask what exactly they've done to deserve this kind of attention?" "They stole my money," I answered bluntly. "My own daughter and son-in-law. They took advantage of my trust, took what they could, and flew here to enjoy themselves, thinking I was sitting at home unsuspecting." Philip's gaze darkened. "I see. In that case, Mrs. Holder, we'll do our best to make their vacation a memorable." "No outright rudeness," I warned. "No spoiled food or anything like that. I want them to experience discomfort and bewilderment, not poisoning." "Of course. We are a five-star resort with an impeccable reputation. Even in these, unconventional situations, we maintain professionalism." After Philip left, I unpacked my suitcase and laid out my tools. Among them were a small pair of night vision binoculars, a device for generating strange sounds, a miniature printer for printing notes, and a few other useful little things I had purchased before I left. I wasn't going to act rudely or primitively. My revenge was to be subtle, gradual, almost elusive like drops of water that sharpen a stone. Day by day, moment by moment, their perfect vacation would turn into a nightmare, and they'll never know who's behind it until I decide to reveal the cards myself. The first thing I did was use my binoculars to study Audrey and Reed's daily routine. They spent most of their time on the beach or in a restaurant, enjoying all the delights of an expensive resort. My telescope allowed me to see them clearly enough to notice Reed constantly ordering the most expensive drinks and Audrey trying on new outfits she must have bought with my money. In the evening, I contacted Philip on the internal phone and gave my first instructions. Operation Spoiled Vacation began the next morning. I woke up early and took up an observation post on my terrace. At 8:30, the doorbell of Audrey and Reed's villa rang. Through my binoculars, I saw a sleepy Reed open the door and then stare in bewilderment at the two masseurs with full equipment. "We're here for a special couples massage with clay wrap, sir," came the voice of one of them. "You booked the service for 8:30. "What?" Reed rubbed his eyes. "We didn't order anything." "But it says here." The masseur checked his clipboard. "Villa 16, Mr. and Mrs. Nimble, special clay revival massage, paid for and confirmed last night." I saw Reed look back confusedly at Audrey, who had just emerged from the bedroom bundled up in a robe. "Honey, did you book a massage for this morning?" Audrey shook her head, looking equally puzzled. "There must be some mistake," Reed told the masseuses. "We didn't place such an order." "Oh, we apologize for the inconvenience," the masseur replied politely. "However, the service has already been paid for, and we have reserved a time for you. And maybe you will take advantage of our offer after all. It is one of the most popular massages at our resort." Reed and Audrey looked at each other. I could almost read their thoughts. If the service was paid for, why not take advantage of it? "Okay," Reed finally agreed. "Give us 10 minutes to get ready." The masseurs nodded and began setting up the equipment on the villa's terrace. I smiled. The first part of the plan was going perfectly. Clay revival wasn't exactly an ordinary massage. It involved applying a special clay mask to the entire body, which then had to harden for an hour. The treatment was really good for the skin, but had one small drawback: a temporary change in skin tone to a greenish gray that lasted for about a day. 2 hours later, when the massage was over, I saw the result. Audrey and Reed, both with the characteristic greenish skin tone, looked confused as they looked at themselves in the terrace mirror. "Did they say it was normal?" Audrey asked, examining her hands. "Yeah, it should wear off in a day or so," Reed replied, but there was doubt in his voice. Audrey was obviously upset. "What are we going to do now?" "I can't go to the beach like this. I have a photo shoot planned for Instagram." The first crack in their perfect vacation appeared. The next stage began at lunchtime. Audrey and Reed, still with a greenish skin tone but already a bit faded thanks to the intense shower, decided to have lunch in their villa, avoiding prying eyes. They ordered dishes from the menu and were quietly waiting for delivery when a waiter appeared with 3 huge trays. "Your order, sir," he said, beginning to arrange the dishes on the table. "But we only ordered salad and pasta for 2, Reed objected, looking at the abundance of food. "According to my information, you ordered the full seafood tasting set, sir," the waiter replied. "The chef's special." "There's some kind of mistake here." Audrey shook her head. "We would never order that much food." The waiter checked his tablet. "The order was confirmed from your villa room an hour ago, madam, and already paid for from the card linked to your account." Reed snatched the tablet and stared at the screen. I knew what he was seeing. The order had indeed been placed from their villa number, and the amount had already been charged to their card, or rather, to my card, which they had so graciously used to pay for their stay. "This is some kind of misunderstanding," Reed muttered. "We never—" "Maybe you pressed something wrong on the resort's app?" Audrey suggested irritably. "You're always rushing around and not watching what you're doing." "I didn't use the app at all today," Reed snapped at her. The waiter stood there with a nonchalant expression on his face, waiting patiently for a decision. "Well, as long as it's paid for," Reed waved his hand. "Leave it here." As soon as the waiter left, an argument broke out between Audrey and Reed. She accused him of mindlessly spending money. He denied having anything to do with the order. Gradually, their voices grew louder and louder, and even from my terrace I could hear bits and pieces of their bickering. In the evening, another surprise awaited them. When they finally decided to go to the beach, having applied a thick layer of foundation to hide the greenish tint of their skin, they were met by a parasailing instructor. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Nimble," he exclaimed cheerfully. "We are ready for your extreme flight." "What extreme flight?" Reed already looked exhausted by the constant surprises. "You have booked the highest parachute flight, sir." The instructor pointed to the boat at the pier. "We'll take you up to 50 meters above sea level. The best view on the whole island." "We didn't book anything," Audrey said firmly. "There must be some mistake." "But the reservation is in your name," the instructor showed a note on his clipboard. "And paid in full." Reed looked at Audrey. "Are you sure you didn't make that reservation? Maybe you wanted to surprise me?" "I would never order something so extreme," Audrey replied. She was afraid of heights, and Reed was well aware of that. "Then who did it?" Reed raised his voice. "First the massage, then lunch, now this? What's going on?" The instructor shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. "Are you coming or should I cancel?" "Cancel it," Reed said. "And tell the hotel management we need to talk to them about the strange glitches in their reservation system." When the instructor left, Audrey turned to Reed. "Are you sure it's a glitch in the system? Maybe you make these reservations yourself and just forget about it." "Are you serious?" Reed blushed with anger. "Why would I order a massage that makes us green, food we can't eat, and an attraction you hate?" "I don't know, Reed. Maybe you just like spending money." Audrey crossed his arms over his chest. "You've always been like that." They returned to the villa without enjoying the sunset, the beach, or the sea. The first day of their perfect vacation was completely ruined. I watched the whole thing with quiet satisfaction. The plan was working even better than I had expected. They were already beginning to suspect each other, and that was just the beginning. On the second day, I raised the stakes. Through Philippe, I organized a series of calls to their villa, at 30-minute intervals, starting at 6 in the morning. Each time they picked up, the line was dead, but the call managed to wake them up. After the 5th call, Reed called the front desk with a complaint. The receptionist, instructed by Philip, politely apologized, and explained that the problem was probably with their phone. A technician would be sent immediately. The technician spent almost 2 hours in their villa, taking the phone apart and putting it back together, checking the wires, testing the line. He found no problems because there weren't any, but his prolonged presence effectively ruined Audrey and Reed's entire morning. When they finally made it out to the beach, their sunbeds were occupied by another couple. "I'm sorry, but these seats are reserved for us," Reed said. "Not at all," the man said, showing his towel with the number on it. "We booked them yesterday." "But we did the same thing!" Audrey exclaimed. "Those sunbeds were ours all day yesterday." A beach staff member came over and confirmed that the sunbeds were indeed reserved for another couple in the system. Audrey and Reed's reservation had somehow disappeared. "Sorry for the inconvenience," said the staff member. "We can offer you other seats, a little further from the sea." Frustrated and annoyed, Audrey and Reed were forced to accept seats in the last row, next to the path where other vacationers were constantly walking. In the evening, special cleaners showed up at their room. According to the manager, in a neighboring room found tropical ants, and now there was a preventive treatment of all the nearby villas. "But it's perfectly safe," assured the manager. "You'll just have to leave the villa for 3 hours while the specialists do their work." Audrey and Reed were forced to spend the evening in the resort's communal bar, instead of having a romantic dinner on the terrace of their villa as they had planned. I saw them at a table in the corner. They barely spoke to each other, immersed in their phones with obvious irritation on their faces. When they got back to the villa, there was another surprise waiting for them. All their belongings had been neatly folded and moved. The cleaners had really done their job. But some items were out of place. Reed's clothes were mixed in with Audrey's. Makeup had moved from the bathroom to the dressing table. Phone chargers disappeared from outlets and found themselves in a suitcase. Minor inconveniences, but their effects were piling up. I heard Audrey accuse Reed of being disorganized, and he snapped back, claiming she was being too picky. On the third day of the operation, they got a special surprise. In the morning, as they were having breakfast on the terrace, a resort employee approached them with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of champagne. "Congratulations on your wedding anniversary, Mr. and Mrs. Nimble." He smiled as he handed over the gifts. Reed looked at Audrey in surprise. "What anniversary? We've been married 7 years and 3 months." Audrey looked equally puzzled. "There must be some mistake, but we have it on record that you are celebrating your 10th wedding anniversary." The employee checked his records. "Isn't this your villa, number 16? "Yes, but—" "And you are Mr. and Mrs. Nimble?" "Yes, but we don't have any anniversary," Audrey insisted. "That's odd." The employee looked genuinely confused. "Our system shows that the order for anniversary greetings was placed on your behalf." "By whom?" Reed asked. "The system shows a phone number." The employee showed a recording. "Isn't that your number?" Reed looked at the screen and turned pale. I knew what he was seeing, the phone number of my home phone in Bellevue. "No," he answered tensely. "That's not our number." When the employee left, Reed turned to Audrey with concern in his eyes. "It's your mother's number." Audrey looked at him intently. "It can't be. It's some kind of coincidence." "Coincidence?" Reed laughed nervously. "After everything that had happened these days, the massages, the calls, the meals, the lounging, do you think my mother is somehow, what, stalking us?" Audrey shook her head. "That's ridiculous. She's 74, she doesn't even know where we are." "She doesn't?" Reed lowered his voice. "Are you sure?" They fell silent, looking at each other with growing suspicion and concern. The first seeds of paranoia had been sown. I smiled, watching them through the binoculars. My plan was working perfectly. They didn't know I was here yet, but they were already starting to guess that something was wrong. Soon they would be suspicious of every employee at the resort, every oddity, every glance in their direction. And that was just the beginning. The fourth day of my stay in the Maldives began with a quiet knock on the door. Philip, the resort manager, stood on the doorstep with a clipboard in hand and a delicate half-smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Holder," he greeted me. "How is your vacation going?" "Fine," I replied, inviting him in. "Have a seat, Philip. Coffee?" "Thank you. I'd like some." I made 2 cups of coffee and we sat down on the terrace. There was a beautiful view of the lagoon, and Audrey and Reed's villa could be seen through the palm trees. Our guests are having a difficult vacation, said Philip, taking a sip of coffee. Yesterday, Mr. Nimble demanded a meeting with the hotel management. He expressed his dissatisfaction with numerous strange coincidences and system failures. And what did you say to him? I asked. That we deeply regret the inconvenience and offered as compensation a complimentary dinner in our premium restaurant tonight. Did they accept? After some hesitation, yes. It seemed to improve their mood a little. I nodded, contemplating the next stage of my plan. Philip, do you remember we talked about a possible escalation of the situation? Of course. He tensed visibly. Do you want to move on to the final part? Yes, it's time to end this game. I put my cup down and looked him straight in the eye. I've prepared all the necessary documents. They're in your email. Philip checked his email on his tablet and nodded, looking at the files I'd sent. Are you sure you want to act so decisive? He asked with slight concern. Absolutely. They deserve it. My voice sounded firm. Just follow the instructions and everything will be fine. After Philip left, I started making preparations for the evening. I took a black dress out of my suitcase, not too fancy, but elegant. A pearl necklace that Audrey would always recognize. I'd worn it to her graduation and wedding. A subtle but obvious clue to my presence when the time came. At noon, I watched as my plan began to unfold. One of the hotel managers, accompanied by 2 security officers, approached Audrey and Reed's villa. Even from my terrace, I could see Reed jumping out, waving his arms and emotionally proving something. Audrey stood back with her arms wrapped around herself, a characteristic gesture she had done since childhood when she was scared or upset. 20 minutes of fierce arguing later, I saw the hotel staff begin carrying Audrey and Reed's luggage out of the villa. I was overwhelmed with satisfaction. The plan had worked flawlessly. I called Philip. Are they in the main building yet? I asked when he answered. Yes, Mrs. Halder. Mr. Nimble is extremely upset. The documents of unpaid debts look very convincing, especially with the official stamp of the bank. And Mrs. Nimble? She's in tears, answered Philip. I think she's beginning to guess what's going on, especially after we told her the information came from Bellevue. That's fine, I smiled. Everything's going according to plan. Have the room ready for the meeting by 6 p.m. I spent the rest of the time in pleasant anticipation. I carefully applied my makeup, styled my hair, and put on the dress I'd chosen. Looking flawless was an important part of my plan. Audrey and Reed needed to see not a helpless old lady, but a confident woman who outplayed them. At 5:45, I got a call from Philip. They're waiting in the conference room like you asked, he informed me. Mr. Nimble tried to book return tickets, but his credit card was declined. All their cards are blocked, as you said. I took care of that in advance, I confirmed. Are they together now? Yes, but there's obvious tension between them. They barely speak to each other. It's perfect. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. Straight back, head held high, confident look. I didn't look 74 at all now, but I had a fire of determination and triumph in my eyes. The hotel conference room was in the main building, with panoramic windows overlooking the ocean. When I walked in, Audrey and Reed were sitting at a long table, silent and somber. When they saw me, they froze as if they'd seen a ghost. Mom? Audrey jumped up, her face contorted with shock. What are you doing here? Hello, dear. I walked calmly to the other end of the table. How was your vacation? I hope the weather in Boston didn't disappoint you. Reed turned pale and lowered his eyes. Audrey continued to stare at me with her mouth open. But when? She stammered, trying to collect her thoughts. You're supposed to be home. And you should be in Boston, I parried, sitting down across from them. It's amazing how quickly plans change, isn't it? There was a heavy silence in the room. Audrey sank slowly back into her chair, her hands shaking visibly. It's you, she whispered. It's been you all this time. The massages, the phone calls, the lounging, and the flowers and the champagne and so much more. I nodded. I'm glad you finally figured it out. Reed suddenly pounded his fist on the table. This is crazy. You've been following us, stalking us, ruining our vacation. Your vacation? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting wording, considering it was my money that paid for it. Mom, we can explain everything, Audrey began with a pleading tone in her voice. Explain what? I interrupted. How you stole money from an account I trusted you to access for emergencies. How you lied about a business trip. How you planned to enjoy yourself while I sat at home in ignorance. Audrey opened her mouth but couldn't find anything to answer. I knew everything from the beginning, I continued. Your visits, your sudden concern, your interest in my finances. You've been so predictable, it's even disappointing. And now what? Reed asked, his voice sounding hoarse. You've had your way. The vacation is ruined. We've been kicked out of the villa. Are you happy? Oh, that's just the beginning. I opened the folder I'd brought with me. You see, I didn't just fly here to ruin your vacation. I'm here to tell you about the consequences of your actions. I pulled out the first document and placed it on the table. First, all credit cards associated with my accounts have been blocked, including the ones you use for your daily expenses, Reed. Yes, I know you linked your cards to my reserve account 2 years ago. Quite ingenious, but not thorough enough. Reed turned even paler. Secondly, I pulled out the next document. I revoked the power of attorney I gave you, Audrey. Officially, that happened 3 days ago. So the last withdrawals you made are technically fraud. Audrey gasped. Have you filed a police report on us? Not yet, I paused. But all the evidence has been prepared and is with my lawyer. One phone call and you'll both be facing criminal charges. You won't do that, Audrey shook her head. I'm your daughter. That's why betrayal from you hurts so much. I looked her straight in the eye. But you're right. I don't want to see you behind bars, so I'm offering you an alternative. I pulled out another document and put it in front of them. Voluntary restitution. You admit to misappropriating my funds and agree to repay the full amount within a year. With interest. Reed took the document with trembling hands. But that's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll have to find it, I shrugged. Sell the house, sell the cars, cut back on expenses. Believe me, prison will cost you more than that. Audrey began to cry, covering her face with her hands. Mommy, please. We never wanted to. Didn't want what? I interrupted. Cheat on me? Steal my money? Leave me alone while you're having fun on the other side of the world? What exactly didn't you want to do, Audrey? She didn't answer, only sobbed quietly. I've always given you everything I could, I continued more gently. Education, support, freedom of choice. I've never been a perfect mother, but I've always been honest with you. And how did you repay me? Lies and betrayal. Reed stood up suddenly. It was all her idea. He pointed at Audrey. She said you wouldn't use that money anyway, that you wouldn't even notice. Audrey looked up, her eyes widening with shock. Reed, how can you? It's true. He turned to me. She's been planning for months how to access your accounts. I just agreed to help. Liar, Audrey screamed. You were the first to suggest using a power of attorney to withdraw money. You said she was old and sick, that she wouldn't need that money anymore. I watched their altercation with cold composure. It was exactly what I wanted them to do, to turn against each other, to show their true colors. That's enough, I interrupted them when the verbal altercation began to turn into a real fight. I'm not interested in which of you was the initiator. You both participated, both lied to my face, both enjoyed the fruits of your deception, and both of you will be held accountable. I took 2 envelopes out of my bag and put them on the table. Your return tickets. The plane leaves tomorrow morning at 10. The hotel has kindly agreed to give you a room for the night. A very modest one, I should say. All expenses for your return will be borne by me. For the last time. Audrey looked at me with a pleading look in her eyes. Mommy, please. We'll get it all back, I promise. Just give us a chance. You'll have a chance, I nodded. Exactly 1 year to make amends. If at the end of that time a dime remains unpaid, I'll file a police report. And if we refuse to sign? Reed asked, pointing to the indemnification document. Then I'll call my lawyer right now, and you'll leave the island with a police escort. I pulled out my phone. Pick one. There was a heavy silence. Reed and Audrey looked at each other, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and defeat. Okay, Reed finally said, taking the pen. We have no choice. He signed the document and handed the pen to Audrey. Her hand trembled as she signed. "You'll never forgive us, will you?" she asked quietly, looking at me with eyes full of tears. "It's not about forgiveness, Audrey," I replied, gathering my papers. "It's about consequences. Every decision has a price. You made your choice, now live with it." I stood up, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. The plan had been executed perfectly, but I felt no joy. Two people I'd once thought of as family sat before me, broken, scared, ready to betray each other at the first opportunity. "Your flight leaves at 10 in the morning," I repeated, heading for the door. "Don't be late." "Mom." Audrey stood up, taking a step in my direction. "What's going to happen next? With us? With you?" I stopped at the door and turned around. "What's next, Audrey? You stole more than just money from me. You stole trust, respect, the very idea of family. Some things you can't get back no matter how much you pay." I walked out of the conference room, leaving them in the silent realization that they had lost something far more valuable than money or a luxury vacation. They had lost me. Philip was waiting for me in the lobby. "Did everything go according to plan, Mrs. Holder?" he asked as he walked me out. "Even better," I replied. They signed. "What do you plan to do next?" I looked out at the sunset that colored the sky over the ocean in shades of pink and gold. "I think I deserve a few days of real vacation," I smiled. "And then I'll start a new life, without them." Philip nodded understandingly. "Your villa is yours for as long as you like." "Thank you, but a couple of days will be enough for me." I looked at him gratefully. "You've been very helpful, Philip." "It was an unusual assignment," he admitted. "But impressive, I must say. Your determination and planning deserve respect." "Years of teaching economics have taught me to calculate risks carefully," I smiled, "and never to invest in unreliable assets." We reached the edge of the pier, where a boat was waiting to take me back to my villa. "Good evening, Mrs. Holder." Philip bowed slightly. "Good evening, Philip." I nodded and stepped into the boat. As the boat pulled away from the pier, I looked back at the main building of the hotel. Through the panoramic windows of the conference room, two figures were visible. Audrey and Reed were still sitting there, immersed in a somber silence, separated not only by the table, but by the realization of what they'd lost because of their greed. I turned away and looked ahead at the setting sun. This chapter of my life was coming to an end, but there was a new one ahead, without betrayal, without fake caring, without having to constantly look over my shoulder. I was free. The chilly January rain drummed on the roof of my car as I parked on a nearby street. The lights in the windows of Emmy and Hugh's house were on. They'd just gotten back. I knew this thanks to the little GPS tracker I'd attached to their car after that night at the club. Information is power, and I wasn't going to be defenseless anymore. It had been 3 days since my public exposure of their betrayal. 3 days of absolute silence. No calls, no messages, no attempts to justify myself. Only Hugh's furious look and Emmy's tears as they left the banqueting hall. I didn't feel the slightest remorse. I'd seen too many fake tears in my 40 years in the DA's office, but my revenge was just beginning. In the morning, I met with Marge, my attorney, to finalize the changes in my will. I was leaving the bulk of my estate to Vivian and a small amount to educational scholarships. Emmy and Hugh received nothing. "Dorothy, you need to think about the future," Marge said, holding out the papers to me. "What do you plan to do next?" "Live," I answered simply. For the first time in a long time, to really live. We discussed the details of a new financial plan. I planned to sell the house in Vancouver and move. A fresh start, free of toxic relationships and painful memories. Vivian had already found several options for small houses on the coast, quiet, cozy places with ocean views. After I finished my errands, I drove to Emmy and Hugh's house. I needed to pick up the last box of stuff I'd left in their storage before my birthday. Mostly old photo albums and a few valuable knickknacks. I planned to visit when they weren't home. I still had a key to their house that Emmy had given me just in case. Irony. I turned the key in the lock and opened the door. The house was unusually quiet. No music, conversations, or TV sounds, just a faucet dripping somewhere. The air was stale, as if the place hadn't been ventilated in a long time. On the coffee table, I noticed a stack of letters. bills, bank notices, official letters. One of them had been opened, and I saw the logo of the bank where Hugh worked. The words final warning and foreclosure caught my attention. I carefully pulled out the letter. The bank that had issued Emmy and Hugh's mortgage loan was notifying them that they had begun foreclosure proceedings on their home for 6 months of unpaid payments. The total arrears amounted to an impressive sum. It was now clear why they were so desperate to gain control of my finances. They were drowning in debt and saw me as a lifeline. I went upstairs to get my things. The box stood in the guest bedroom untouched. Checking the contents, I made sure everything was in place. Photos, albums, my mother's old jewelry box. As I descended to the first floor, I heard the sound of the door opening. Emmy and Hugh had come home earlier than I expected. I froze in the hallway holding the box. The first to enter was Emmy. Her face was gaunt, dark circles under her eyes. Hugh followed her with a strange expression, a mixture of anger and despair. They froze when they saw me. "Mom!" Emmy's voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" "Getting my things," I answered calmly, lifting the box. "I didn't want to bother you." Hugh squinted his eyes. "How did you get in?" "The key you gave me, remember? I put it on the dresser next to me. I won't be needing it again." Emmy looked confused, almost frightened. She looked from me to the box and back again. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened at your birthday party." "There's nothing to talk about, Imogen." My voice was flat and cold. It was clear. It was a misunderstanding, Hugh interjected. "We can explain." I laughed, but there was no mirth in it. "A misunderstanding? The camera caught you breaking into my safe and stealing money. What part of that is a misunderstanding?" They exchanged quick glances. Something about their behavior was odd, almost desperate. "I have something for you," I said, pulling an envelope out of my pocket. Emmy turned pale and Hugh tensed as if expecting a blow. I held the envelope out to Emmy. "What's this?" she asked, hesitating to take it. "A notice from the bank," I said. "That your house is in foreclosure for non-payment of the mortgage. I just wanted to make sure you knew." You know?" Emmy looked shocked. "I know a lot of things." I set the box on the floor and pulled a second envelope out of my bag. "Like the fact that Hugh lost his job 3 months ago, and about your credit cards, which have been overdrawn for a long time, and about borrowing from questionable lenders." Hugh's face contorted with rage. "You've been digging into our finances? That's an invasion of privacy." "No, Hugh. It's called due diligence. I got in touch with an old friend of mine from the DA's finance department. He helped me gather information about your debts after you tried to steal from me." Emmy sank down on the couch, covering his face with his hands. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "To humiliate us even more?" "To make you realize that your actions have consequences," I replied. "You were planning to use me to solve your financial problems, but now you'll have to deal with it on your own. We're going to lose the house." Emmy's voice shook. "We have nowhere to go." "Not my problem." I picked up the box. "By the way, the bank was interested in some strange transactions in Hugh's accounts. Something to do with the company where he supposedly worked for the last few months. There might be an investigation." Hugh turned pale. "You can't do that. I'm your son-in-law." "You tried to steal from me, Hugh," I reminded him. Kinship ceased to mean anything at that moment. I headed for the exit. Emmy jumped up and blocked my way. "Mom, please." Her eyes were full of tears. "We made a terrible mistake, but we're your family. Are you really going to leave us like this?" I looked at my daughter, the woman I'd raised, the woman I loved, the woman I trusted. I felt nothing but cold disappointment. "You made a choice, Emmy, when you decided that my condition was more important than our relationship. When you called me an old woman who wouldn't notice a theft. When you chose greed over honesty." "We were desperate," she whispered. "Everything was falling apart around us. And you decided to destroy me," I finished. "But I was stronger than you thought." I walked around Emmy and opened the door. "This is the last time we'll see each other," I said without turning around. "I've changed my will. You're not getting anything. And don't try to contact me or Vivian." "You can't just cut us out of your life," Hugh shouted. "We'll find a way to contest your will." I turned around, looking him straight in the eye. "Try it, Hugh. I have a videotape of your theft. confessions of fraud, and plans to manipulate me. Any court will be on my side. The door closed behind me, cutting off their objections. I got into the car and took a deep breath. A strange sense of release came over me. It was as if heavy chains had fallen from my shoulders. A week later, I met with a realtor to sign the papers to sell the house. The big mansion that held so many memories would go to a new family, and I'd get a fresh start. Vivian found the perfect place in the small coastal town of Qualicham Beach, a 3-hour drive from Vancouver. A small but cozy house with a terrace overlooking the ocean. Quiet neighborhood, friendly neighbors, no big city hustle and bustle. "Are you sure you want to keep all this?" Vivian asked as we packed up the boxes. "So many memories." "I'm taking the memories with me," I said, wrapping the picture of Edward carefully. "Everything else is just stuff." The move took less than a month. It was amazing how few really important things had accumulated in 74 years of life. Clothes, books, a few pieces of furniture with a special history, photographs. Everything else I sold or gave away. My new home was filled with light and the smell of the sea. The terrace overlooked the vast ocean, changing colors depending on the time of day and the weather. In the mornings, I woke up to the sound of seagulls and the sound of the surf. In the evenings, I watched sunsets that colored the water in shades of gold and purple. Vivian often came to visit me on weekends. We walked along the beach, collected shells, drank wine on the terrace. Sometimes Eleanor or other friends would join us. Life took on new colors. I found new hobbies. I enrolled in watercolor classes at the local cultural center. I volunteered at the library, where I organized reading evenings for children. I joined a club for bird lovers. Every morning started with a jog along the beach. At my age, it's important to stay active. I never heard from Emmy and Hugh. Marge said they had sold the house, or rather, the bank had foreclosed on it. Where they'd moved to, what they were doing, I was no longer interested. I severed all ties, changed my phone number, even my email address. They ceased to exist for me. 6 months after the move, Vivian brought me a small envelope. "This came to my address," she said, holding it out. "From Emmy." I stared at the envelope for a long time, hesitating to open it. Finally, I tore the paper open. Inside was a short note and a key, the same key to my safe that Emmy had once taken without asking. "Mom, I know you don't want to see or hear from me, and I understand why. I just wanted to give back what belongs to you, and to tell you that Hugh and I broke up. I realized he was the catalyst for our problems, but not the cause of them. The real problem was me, my greed and selfishness." I hope Vivian nodded understandingly. She knew me better than anyone, and she understood that my decision was final. That evening, we sat on the terrace, watching the sunset. The ocean shimmered with every shade of red and gold, like a blazing bonfire. Seagulls circled over the water, their cries merging with the sound of the surf. "You know," Vivian said, sipping her wine, "I've never seen you so peaceful." I smiled, looking at the horizon where the sky met the ocean. "Because I'm finally free from expectations, from toxic relationships, from the past." The sun slowly dipped below the horizon line, coloring the sky a dark purple. One by one, the stars lit up over the ocean. I took a deep breath of the salty sea air, filling my lungs with freshness and freedom. There was a whole life ahead of me, a new life I had created for myself. No betrayal, no manipulation, no pain, just peace, freedom, and a vast ocean of possibilities. "To new beginnings," I said, raising my glass. "To freedom," Vivian said. Our glasses clinked quietly in the evening air, sealing our promise to live life to the fullest despite past disappointments. I had finally found my own path, a path that was free of toxic relationships and fake affection.